Why selling feels so hard. Now, if you're watching this video, you're probably in two positions, right? You're in one position where you're trying to enter essentially the market, the skill set, you're learning it, you're building it up. You may have invested in a mentorship, or you may have just trying to teach yourself and you're wanting some more free value. Then there's the second part. You're either obviously in high ticket closing, you've been doing it for a while now, maybe 1, 2, 3 months, maybe 4, 5 months, but you've kind of hit this roadblock, and it's a very natural roadblock. It's a very common thing, and you can't push up, your closing percentage. You may be finding it hard. You may be struggling with, something here and there. Your script may not be working. You may be stuck on around 35% close rate, and you're just trying to explore different pathways. Now, let me tell you something. Before you even watch this video, I'm not going to go into scripts. I'm not going to do any of that bollocks, right? Basically scriptless selling, because what I focus on is psychology, right? I've gone away, I've read podcasts, I've tried and narrowed into my calls, I've read books, I've listened, I've done loads of these kind of psychology based salesmen that have been rooted back from the 1900s. I've done my homework, and I implemented that into my essentially my closing. My close rate shot up massively, from about 37% up to nearly 65, 66%. So for me personally, this has worked. I would like for you to go away and implement it into your closing. But there's two reasons why selling feels hard, which you may, come across. Now, it's because you're trying to convince and you're trying to decide. Now, you're trying to convince because a lot of new closers, when they get to objection handling or they don't know what to say and there's silence, they try to fill it with logical things. They try to blurt out loads of things. Your tonality goes out the window, your pace goes out the window, you're hyperactive, you start speaking quick. And instead of actually just treating the real root of the problem, which is, their identity, you try to, treat these behaviors, which are the symptoms. And in the meanwhile, throughout the call, you're probably trying to decide, right? You're trying to decide if they're going to object. What objection are they going to give? Are they actually, listening to me? Are they actually buying into what I'm saying? Are they actually, you know, taking on this new identity that I'm trying to pressure into them? And these two kind of combinations are why most sales conversations with your prospects may fail, because they're treated like persuasion problems. You're trying to attack their logical certainty behind what their decisions have been, why they should pay for the course or the mentorship or whatever you're selling. Because subconsciously that they're on the call for your offer, otherwise they wouldn't be on there. And instead of actually treating the real root, which is their identity and which is potentially why they haven't just thrown the credit card at you, you're trying to actually just sell the offer. And most people don't buy offers, sorry. They buy into their identities. And this is what a sales conversation is. It's literally an identity problem instead of a persuasion problem, right? So with the correct tonality, with the correct pace, with the correct stance, certainty, and, mindset, belief system as a closer off the call, that will be taken onto the call. So who you believe you are off the call will be taken to on the call. With the correct tonality, the correct pace, the correct positions, the correct certainty, your capabilities will be so much more because you'll be able to lower resistance immediately. And resistance is literally, you know, objections, right? It's the friction between the gap where they are now in their current situation and where they want to be, where they are in the future self, their future identity, the new identity, as you may say. And a lot of closers try to force and pressure people into this version 2.0 of themselves on the call in 40 minutes. Now, I want you to ask yourself, imagine you were to get on that call and you have to have the price shock of, 10K, let's say. And in objection handling, because the closer hasn't done a good enough job, for example, instead of them actually dealing with the real problem, the real root on potentially why you don't want to put your money down, which may be fear, uncertainty, they just try to sell you the offer. And you've just had a 10-minute pitch. And you're stuck there thinking, well, we've just gone over this. They're just trying to, persuade me, pressure me into buying it. And of course, what do? You put your shield up, you build that resistance, and that is where resistance forms. Now, what you need to do instead is make them feel understood, neutralize the battleground, right? And don't just try to teach them what the offer is or what you're trying to sell them, or stop trying to teach them on where they need to be or where they are now, and trying to teach them what the harm is in staying in the same position. Because if you tell me something, I don't 100% believe it. Now, if I was to say it out loud, anything that comes out of my mouth, I 100% believe. So instead of trying to teach them, make them understand. And how? Well, make them say it. And this comes down to questions and where you position yourself. Because the brain's primary job is to protect the identity of themselves. It's a vulnerability, it's who they are, it's their self image, and not to pursue growth. Because their identity is very short term. It's today, it's tomorrow. How I wake up, how I win in the morning. That's behaviors, but comes back to my identity, my belief system. So their identity is very short term. Whereas pursuing growth can be a very gradual, long, you know, progression. It can be a very long process, and it can be 1% better every day. But that could be up to a year. So on a call where they were to get a price shock, or where that you're trying to justify, you know, why they need to make this identity shift, and make them understand why they need to make this identity shift out the best beliefs in your heart. It isn't to persuade them that growth is going to be why they should join, because growth could be 2, 3, 4, 5 months down the line, depending on your mentorship. Instead, you need to open up their identity and give them that comfort space, that confidence out of your own authority and your certainty to open up. And this is why objections equals self-protection. They're trying to externalize it for the reason why they don't want to open up. They don't want to tell you they're fearful. They're either fearful because they have unfamiliar identity. Then they're not used to this identity that makes 10k decisions on the day within 40 minutes. They don't have this identity that just jumps into anything without logically thinking everything over. And that's why they've had to go away and think about it for the last 2 years and procrastinate for any decision they make. And their logic is overridden by self-image, because self-image is the epitome of any human being. What if I fail? What does my mum think? What does my sister think? What's my girlfriend going to think? What's my friends going to think if I chuck 5k down and I fail and I do this and I don't believe in myself? So your goal is to reframe objections as normal instead of just resistance. Now, you may think, what do I mean by this? Well, if you think their current identity is, I don't believe in myself, I'm not consistent, I usually hesitate, I've never followed through with anything, all of these kind of common, fearful, uncertain identities, right? Which leads to behaviors of procrastination, being lazy, not being motivated, not wanting to do research, not wanting to invest in themselves, not wanting to do anything. And that leads to outcomes of what? Well, staying in the same position. And then you have their desired identity. Who is confident? Who is decisive? Who is self-investing and in control of, their mornings, their days, their routines themselves? They take every risk on, every opportunity on with head, full on. And in between that, you have this identity lag. Now, this identity lag is typically, as I was going through that, identity, behaviors, and outcomes, this kind of aggressive loop. And this, I mean by aggressive, is if you get stuck in it. Now, if you have a low frequency identity, your behaviors are going to be as what I've just said, low frequency. You're not going to take action. You're not going to be self-investing. You're not going to be decisive and on the spot. And, you're not going to be confident and believing in yourself. So what are your outcomes? Well, you stay in the same identity because you have no outcomes. Your outcomes is low frequency as your identity. You work your 9 to 5, you stay in the same job. And this is where hesitation lives here, between this gap, this identity lag. Now, what is the problem with this? Now, persuasion tries to drag someone across the gap. And as you can think, imagine a piece of wall, and I'm holding it up. Now, at one end is your future self, and one end is your current self. Now imagine you get your finger and just keep going over and over and over, and you're trying to drag, like basically one end to the other. Well, that's going to burn your fingers. It's going to cause friction. It's going to cause resistance. Same exact thing with a sales call. If you just try to persuade people and just trying to convince them that this is the best thing to do, and just try to sell it based on growth factors, and try to sell them on the actual offer, all it does is create resistance. And if resistance is created, then pressure on the piece of wool will act defense. The wool will start coming off and probably hurting your finger and burning you simply. And defense kills trust. They don't believe what you're saying now. You've become comms hungry. And I've had this so many times in the past where I try to convince in objection handling, and then I try to, get deposits and try to pull it down, and we'll do anything like, and I actually start leaning in, and they have all the authority. And trust is required for identity movement. They need to trust in your certainty. They need to make sure you are certain in what you're saying. It's like if I was a doctor and you came to me and you had a pain in your knee, and I said you need to go to the hospital because it looks like it's fractured. I need you to 100% that day go to the doctors or the hospital because you believe it's fractured. It's the same reasoning with trust. Just like how you trust a GP or the doctors if they say you've got a brain tumor. Same thing. Now, if the doctor was sat there trying to persuade you and you were picking up that they're not very certain in what they're saying, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to put up your defense. You're not going to trust them. You're not going to believe, and you're probably not going to go to the hospital. It's the same thing with identity. You're not going to probably want to get into that new identity if you don't have that trust there. So, how do you actually stop this identity lag? Well, this is what identity approximation is. Identity approximation doesn't force change, right? We don't persuade around here. We don't have a script that is a one script fit for all. We don't just sit there and say ingenuine questions. We have a genuine, real conversation with people. Different prospects have different belief systems, right? And this creates safe proximity to the next version of themselves. Small decisions, mental rehearsal, language alignment, picking up on certain language. If I think I can do this, I want to. All these kind of small tweaks that many closers just allow go by, but actually has such a strong meaning because it's just blurting out their identity, and they don't even know it. Subconsciously, they don't know it. And then self-authorization, right? And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm not pressuring them to make the identity. I'm making them understand in a way that they're essentially closing themselves. They're allowing it to happen themselves. They're telling me. And I've had so many closing calls where people thank me. They say, oh, I've literally had a conversation I've never had before. I take people through journeys that they've never kind of ridden before. I ask certain questions that, I've had a guy that had 3 calls before me for different, courses, mentorships. And they were so ingenuine. They looked like they were just reading off a script. And what I did is I made the concept feel gentle, logical, and inevitable. I don't force them into a corner where yes, kind of is the only option, but through kind of just pressure tactics, persuasion, convincing so deep, I put them in a corner which they put themselves in, where they put their self in a position where the answer is only yes, right? It doesn't come from me, it comes from them. They're authorizing it themselves. And what does that cause? It causes a lot more trust, a lot more, comfortability. They feel understood, and they just pick from my certainty. They just take the confidence from my certainty to use that to make the decision. And whilst for a lot of sales reps, a lot of it isn't emotional certainty, for them, I also make it as logical as possible. Whatever it is, great for their business. Whatever they need to do to make their business the best. And logically, it is the right decision. And again, it's self-authorizing. So, the steps is kind of what I take through when I go through a sales call. So, awareness of the problems, the awareness of, what has been holding them back in the last 2 years, what their goals are, motivations, desires are. Then the identity transition, right? And this is more of a psychological part for me. When I go for a sales call, I start to ask myself questions, from the get go. What is their internal compass saying? If a guy's being very down, doubtful in himself when we go and, when I'm trying to find out his desired outcomes. If he's like, well, I can only make 3K, like, I don't know if I can make 10K. Or, I start asking myself, so what is actually best for this person? And I start asking questions based off my subconscious thoughts. Then we have self-recognition, which is more of the commitment side, right? The identity shift. They're telling me, what's going to be the consequences if they don't change. And I always go through a binary personas, person A or person B. And they always have to pick one because it's either this or this. It's like two doors. And every time they open the correct door, which is their future self, they're recognizing it themselves. And I'm not forcing them through a door. Then I'm not forcing them into picking person B. All I'm doing is letting them choose which person. And going off the back of that, they're authorizing it themselves and they do it themselves. And then obviously the decision. And this is the greatest part because hardly ever recently have I had any objections. Maybe one or two here. I'm not perfect. I'm not going to sit here and say I am perfect because I'm not. Right? I've got still a lot of learning to do. Still got a lot of repetitions, but recently, obviously, I've seen that the objections don't come as hard. It's their decision. And this also comes before the pitch. Always the commitment tie down. I believe in you, but do my beliefs mean fuck all? Do you actually believe in yourself? So the decision comes as well. And people don't buy when convinced. They buy when the decision feels like them. And you may think, well, the decision doesn't feel like them because they're trying to step into their new identity. But what we're doing is we're not making them step into that brand new identity there, then, 40 minutes. All we're doing is aligning their current self with what their future self looks like to them based on their desired outcomes, based on what they tell me, based on the data they give me. And what I do is I then carry them through a journey where they start to align themselves and realize it themselves that they are starting to become this person, actually put themselves in the right, essentially, funnel, right, which allows them to go into the pathway, which will take them onto whoever they want to be, if that's 10K, 15K, 20K. But all starts with making that decision because the decision isn't based off, what their current perspectives are, because otherwise they'd be stuck in the same spot. It's based off their future self, based off what their future self believes. And that decision on the call would be to put down 10K, 5K, 3K, 4K, whatever it is. Because otherwise, if they don't, they will never be able to align or get to their future self. So it all just comes with that first step. And I always frame it in that way because the first step is like going up the first stair. But you may have 50 stairs ahead. So when you're trying to drag the person up the 50 stairs on a call, it's going to feel like a long old time. They might get tired legs. But if you take one step at a time, small increments, it feels a lot more comfortable. They do it at their pace. But all that matters on a closing call is they get up on that first step. And once you think like that, it's not that hard. So, essentially, what is the guaranteed shift? Guaranteed shift is that results aren't guaranteed, right? I don't know if many gurus sit there, right, and they tell you, I will get you 100% to this, I will 100% place you, right? We offer placement in our sales coaching, right? We have so many job boards, we have so many opportunities, all the boys are on them. We don't guarantee results. Because why? It comes down to you, right? We can't guarantee that you're going to put in the work. We can't guarantee that you're going to get on an offer and do the work. So it's logistically delusional. But the identity movement is guaranteed. Because as soon as you step in and put, X amount down, that's already one step into your future self. Then you start going through the training modules. Then you start making looms. Then you start putting yourself out there. And you start networking, connecting. And the identity movement is happening in real time. And this comes down to the moment someone commits, behavior changes. And what does behavior change cause? Outcomes to change. And it's simple as that. So identity movement is guaranteed, but results we never offer are. Now, what does this look like in conversations, right? And this goes back to binary frames. There's many styles. I have about 5 or 6, 7 styles, but obviously I'll share with two of you today. So there's binary frame one, which is always like decision style, and there's ways to frame it. But the ways I like to frame it is, person A is the person that waits for certainty, needs reassurance, delays until it feels safe and feels okay to them. Or there's person B, who actually moves with this partial information instead of having to go off with doing loads of research and having to do all of this kind of, you know, external looking around and free value. And he decides and then figures it out and actually builds certainty through action instead of just waiting for a certainty to occur. And this is a great kind of binary frame for them, for you who potentially may be struggling with certainty, maybe struggling with the objection that they have to go and do some external research and have a look around. Instead of you jumping into a straight away kind of reframe, I normally just put binary persona on them. Are you person A or person B? And they're going to choose person B, and then you question them why. Why do you want to be person B? So that's a great one to use. And again, it's simple. Person A or person B, and it's literally two doors. Which one are you going to pick? And then self-trust is a nice little one as well. Binary frame 2, which is person A, who outsources decisions, needs permission, looks for guarantees. And there's person B, who trusts their judgment, who actually takes ownership and accepts responsibility. And if you don't know already, this is a great one for partner objection. And a lot of this obviously can be used again in pre-discovering. But if you're looking to perfect, kind of pre-handling objections, you have to be comfortable with the fact you have to soak up objections. Because once you soak up objections and you're able to go on 30, 40-minute kind of rabbit chases with them, you'll start to know all the tricks in the book. You start to realize the signs, the body language, the kind of certain words that they're going to say in discovery. And once you get to challenging them, you're going to be so much better. And you can use binary frames. You can use, kind of all these like magic tricks. But for me, it's very simple. I keep it simple. I don't add all these buzzwords and, all this kind of shit guru shit. It's just psychology. And obviously, the whole point is reframing. And reframing is changing the meaning, not the facts. You're not denying someone's concern. Again, you're acknowledging it, but you're just changing how their brain categorizes it. The human brain doesn't respond to reality, right? It responds to interpretation, how they look at certain situation and actually kind of interpret that. So if they look at, I don't know, a car crash, they don't respond to it because it's a car crash. They respond to it because they know car crashes are bad. They know someone could get hurt. And that's them interpreting the situation. And it's like anything. Money, scarcity, abundance. They look at a certain situation, right? And they interpret it in a way based off their belief system and how they review that, money. Is it a matter of fact that, they're very emotionally attached to money? So they interpret it in a way that, oh no, I can't spend 4 or 5K. Whereas some people interpret in a way that, yeah, okay, I can work this, resourceful. Right? I'm going to find an abundance. So reframing is updating that interpretation of a certain scenario, a certain kind of intent, outlook, a problem, as you may call. So the brain is always constantly asking, what does this mean about me and my safety? Subconsciously, I don't mean they're just saying it out loud. This is a lot that goes on behind their head that they don't know consciously what they're saying, but it leads in kind of through their actions. And when someone raises an objection, it's usually because their current frame says risk, their identity says avoid, failure, fear. And reframing doesn't fight that, right? It just gives the brain a new lens that feels a lot safer or more accurate. just tweaks a little bit on how they interpret that essentially decision. So, what I want you to take away from this video is get away from the scripts. Get away from all of that kind of shenanigans. Get away from all the buzzwords and all the, kind of fancy guru kind of closing shit these days. Because I did indeed, go through scripts and try to learn that way. And my close rate was literally 0% because I was so ingenuine. And once you actually start learning what is actually going on behind someone's brain, that moment will cause guaranteed shift because results are not guaranteed. You're not trying to convince them based on the testimonials that your client has. People don't upload testimonials of people that have failed. They upload testimonials based off bias. And I could show you, as many testimonials as you want, but what's that going to cause? You to feel a bit more happy? I know, different course of mentorship that has testimonials and a bunch of shit. So results, don't try to sell based on results or try to convince based on results. Just sell based on, themselves. Have a genuine conversation with them and help them change that identity. And the moment someone commits, as I said, behavior changes. And that is what causes the identity shift. So, obviously, this is a little insight. If you want to know any more and you actually want to start learning psychology-based sales, then I'll put a booking link below and we'll have literally a 30-40 minute conversation. No obligation at all, right? And I'll give you as much free value as possible on how we close at Echelon. Because we don't do any of this script, right? We just teach exactly this, psychology-based sales, where we cause identity shifts, right? We cause that approximation with their future self. So if you're happy and you like this video, give it a like. Text me. I'm on Instagram. _ Ethan Hughes. Drop me any messages if you want to know more, and we can obviously get into it. But until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.